Perfect. So we are open. I can't see anyone popping in quite yet, but they will do shortly. It's the bit where I get to, oh, I can see the participants going up. This is always the fun bit of hosting these webinars is I press the button and then nothing happens for a few seconds. And then you guys, you're just, you know, you've seen this on Zoom yourself. You're just a participants number that's just steadily ticking up. And I like to imagine you're kind of wandering into some virtual room somewhere, even though really you're just pressing a link in your Outlook or your Teams or wherever else you get your links to Zoom webinars that you signed up for. But hello, as usual, you haven't missed anything. Don't worry, we've not started yet. Just open the doors a couple of minutes early, the virtual doors, so people can hop in. And I will just busk for a little bit so you don't stare at two guys just staring at a camera, because that would be a bit weird, wouldn't it? So hello. If this is your first time, welcome. If this is not your first time, welcome. Welcome to all. So just as a little bit of context in terms of what we're here to do today. So this is our postgraduate marketing webinar series, the only one of its kind, I think. I still don't think anyone else does this with the kind of cadence we do, kind of, you know, getting together every month, hopefully bringing together folks like yourselves, people working in postgraduate marketing recruitment, to talk about postgraduate marketing recruitment and the topics that matter there, whether that's kind of news and policy, and we've had a bit of that recently, haven't we? Or, you know, I'm kind of looking forward to what we're looking at today, you know, some of those kind of perennial topics that we need to kind of reflect on and think about, you know, kind of changing context, changing best practice for that. My name's Mark. Again, some of you may be familiar with me. You will be if you've been along to one of these before, because it's usually me that hosts them. So I'm the director of audience and editorial at FindAUniversity, which is kind of a weird job title that I semi-made up for myself. What it means is it's my job to make sure that all of the things we do, so obviously we provide a bunch of platforms for prospective postgrad students, so find a master's, find a PhD, and other things. It's my job to make sure, on the one hand, that all the things we do are as useful as possible for prospective postgraduate students, but also that by understanding and kind of serving that audience, we can produce useful insight for folks such as yourselves. And that's kind of how I get involved in this bit with our webinar series, really. And it's always a privilege. I do enjoy these. I'm going to say straight away, you know, I'll introduce Nathan and the topic in just a moment. Nathan, I think, is going to present for about 20, 25 minutes, half an hour or so, and then we'll have Q&A at the end. The Q&A is always my favorite bit of this. You know, I say this every time, whether it's in person or on a webinar. You guys are an absolutely lovely community. You share so openly. You know, we're all kind of in this slightly strange scenario doing postgrad. It's a bit of a kind of strange Wild West, slightly frontier posting sometimes. You know, it's sometimes a bit of a lonely role depending on the kind of, you know, institution or provider you're at. And I think it's really nice to be able to come together and chat. So there are no stupid questions. And I'm sure, you know, whatever it is you want to kind of know about Nathan's perspective, the content of his presentation and his expertise in this area, I'm sure he is happy to answer questions. And, you know, please do. So I've enabled the Q&A function. If you pop questions in there during, then we'll kind of pick them up at the end, really. You should be able to see everyone else's questions as well, which means you should be able to kind of upvote and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I won't say much more. I'm just going to kind of situate the topic, really. So we're talking about prospectuses, and prospectuses, it's kind of, I was saying this to Nathan just kind of in the green room. It's one of those topics that, you know, we often return to, don't we? Because we know what the problems are. We know that physical prospectuses have these limitations. They can't be personalized. And that's something I imagine that's, you know, I think is much more important for PG. They cost a lot of money to produce, which is probably also a challenge if you've got maybe a smaller run for PG. And there's obviously a huge environmental impact. You know, unis do their best to minimize this, but I've been at a few study fairs in my time, and it can be a bit depressing when you look at what's sometimes left there, literally left on the table. You know, there are advantages though. Physical prospectuses are quite attractive. There's that nice transactional element. It's a bit premium. And I think, you know, I mean, all I will say to introduce Nathan, I'll let Nathan introduce himself. Nathan's LinkedIn kind of line at the minute currently is, I don't know when you changed this, Nathan, or if it's been a rise, that digital prospectus guy. So if there is anyone who can explain kind of how we can, you know, get past those limitations and also kind of maintain some of those advantages, that kind of premium element and that functionality of traditional print, I think it's Nathan. And I think it's particularly, last thing I'll say, I think it's particularly important that We're going to kind of hear a bit about the history, kind of how we got here. It's so important with a lot of HE stuff. You know, we do a lot because we've always done it. And actually, I think it's important to understand, why do we actually do that? What is it we're trying to achieve? And I know there's going to be a really specific postgrad angle again, which is really important because it's one of those many things that's slightly different when we look at it in a postgrad context. So with that said, and I can see that we've got a healthy number of people in, so I think it's good to start. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, Nathan, and I will hand over to you to introduce yourself a bit more and get us started.
Okay, fab. Let me get everything set up here. All right. Well, thanks for that intro, Mark. It's good to know that somebody takes note of those LinkedIn updates for those little bylines and things. Thanks to everybody who's attended this session as well. This session is called Redefining Postgraduate Prospectuses, Embrace the Digital Recruitment Era. And as Mark kind of mentioned, for the last 18 months or so, I've been working on a digital alternative to the traditionally printed prospectus. And so naturally, I have an interest in all things prospectuses, right? I mean, I've got this, I collect prospectuses. This is one of the many boxes of prospectuses that I have. And I'm going to be talking a lot about what it means to have a prospectus, what prospectuses have traditionally been. And we're also going to look at what people in the sector are doing with their prospectuses in 2023. If you're interested in this sort of conversation, you can find out more about the work that we're doing in this space at prospectus.plus. And so we begin with this question of what is a prospectus? And this is a question that my team is constantly challenging itself with, because what we have on screen here is typically what is considered to be the prospectus. But I think that this traditional image is starting to crumble a little bit. For me, it gets a little bit juicy at point 3. An opportunity for lead gen, but often it's a lot of vanity metrics. You know, how many copies have you handed out? That's it. And you get an email out of it, but your form is probably so big that it ruins the experience from the outset. You know, we've also got to consider the age of these people. A lot of the people that we're speaking to are digital natives, for lack of a better term, I guess. And so they expect digital first communication. And so, you know, this notion of the prospectus, I think, is aging. And on top of all of this, again, like Mark pointed out, I do feel that it's a little bit of an outward symbol that you don't necessarily care about sustainability. And I know that there's a lot of stuff around that. We're going to cover this a bit later on, but the sustainability angle is actually quite big, I would say, in today's market. So what is the history of the prospectus? Well, you know, it's been a few more years than I care to think about. From my own university experience collecting those physical prospectuses. And I wanted to see how the land lies in 2023. So we've gone ahead, like I say, I've been collecting these examples from colleges, universities at UG and PG level throughout. And in large, they follow similar formats. There's some variations in things like size and things that we see. But, you know, generally speaking, there is a traditional format. And I think if we talk about, I mean, this is an undergrad example here, but with a lot of universities that do follow this traditional path, I think this example from UOB encapsulates it perfectly, right? So these are the examples of UOB over the years, and there's 50 years on show here between 1972 and 2022. And honestly, not that much has changed. The images have changed, the typography's changed, the format really hasn't changed all that much. And it's still this kind of book that gets sent out to people. Now, that's not to say that over the last 50 years, there haven't been innovators. There have been a few exceptions. So here is the University of Kent, and we found this from a Facebook post that described it as their video prospectus from the 1980s. I don't know how it was shared with prospects. I love to think that this is a kind of a VHS cassette tape that was sent out via the post for people to slot into their VHS players. And people were complaining that it wasn't on Betamax or something. But there have been these pockets of innovation. And actually, if we look at something like this, we've seen the proliferation of video content due to things like the internet, for example. So I think you'll agree, it's a little bit different from the norm of what we think about when we think about prospectuses, but at least the music is certainly pretty interesting. Now, all of this, I think, comes to a head. I think what I'm saying is that the traditional prospectus is becoming problematic. And what do I mean by that? Well, first of all, they can be really quite long. So typically we're talking 150 to 200 pages long, although a lot of universities have started to think about mini guides. At the same time, I think at this sort of length, we are expecting quite a lot of our audience. You know, in the same number of pages, they could read Animal Farm, for example, by George Orwell. In fact, less pages. But on top of the kind of length of the format, the detail of the thing, they're also incredibly heavy. So typically prospectuses are 350 grams or so. But if you add all of this up, if you're ever collecting, I mean, this box that I have here, I dread to think how heavy this is. And it shows that I haven't been to the gym in quite some time, but they're very heavy. And what's really interesting, I think, is because people have started to slim down their prospectuses, we're almost moving to more of like the American view book model, where you're not listing courses. And I think at Postgrad, we don't list courses quite so much anyway. But are we moving to this American view book format, perhaps, where it's more about the experience and what you'll get out of it rather than the detail? But I'll come on to that later, because that really feels, to me at least, that feels at odds with what postgraduate prospective students want out of their marketing. They're also often super inaccurate. The amount of times that people have said to me, oh, the problem with our prospectus is that it's wrong the moment that it leaves the printing press. And so what you end up with is a document that you spent a lot of money on that lasts about the same time as my iPhone's battery, right? And you get all of these disclaimers at the bottom of printed prospectuses saying, you know, correct at the time of printing and all this sort of stuff, which it kind of erodes trust, I think, a little bit in terms of how people are perceiving you. And of course, it's a nightmare and a headache for you as well. But let's talk about one of the bigger issues that Mark touched on here, is the sustainability angle. And the very fact that they're made of paper, like it or not, is perceived as an unsustainable practice. And so there is this downwards trend for prospective students wanting to receive a printed prospectus. And I know this, and I've got the facts to back that up a little bit later on. But there's also this upward trend for wanting digital alternatives. And there's lots of different studies that have gone on around this. There's the notable UCAS 2022 student lifestyle survey that showed that prospects were falling out of love with institutions that weren't necessarily ethically aligned with sustainability, for example. And at the same time, in the media that we all consume, we're beginning to see things like this.
When something has recycling on the packaging, you have numbers within it. What are the numbers that actually do recycle, and what are the numbers which are just nonsense? And I've explained that so badly, but you...
No, I know exactly. You have a little triangle on the back.
Don't you? You have a triangle on the back, right?
Yeah. Only 1 and 2. Only 1 and 2 have any value.
Isn't
value
that
at all.
mad? That's a lie
Completely
then.
mad.
We're being lied to.
Yeah, we've been totally lied to. And you know the little symbol that, it's called the Mobius loop with the little arrows going around? What do you think that means?
Recyclable.
It means that the company that made the packaging pays a tax to hopefully, and probably not, go towards a recycling system. It doesn't mean anything to do with the packaging being recycling.
So this kind of like revealing, pulling back the curtain on greenwashing is something that we're becoming as a group, we're becoming more aware of every day. And this is actually one of the first clients that I ever worked for. This is Sian Sutherland. She used to own a big skincare brand, and then she's moved on and she now runs a Plastic Planet. And it is all about how businesses can save the planet, essentially, by looking at, the ability to create sustainable solutions. And so with this greenwashing, I think there's more of a spotlight on this sort of stuff than ever. And we often hear about, but our printed prospectus, it's on FSC paper, so it's okay. But in reality, again, FSC paper, it helps to reframe perceptions, but actually, if you delve into the details of it, it really is just about tracking paper around a production facility. It's not actually that much of a sustainable practice. And there's whole levels of detail here. Like, even if your paper was truly, truly recyclable, your inks would have to be, because actually to recycle paper, you have to get rid of all of the inks off the paper, which means tons and tons of water and bleach, not, again, a particularly sustainable practice. And even the most sustainable inks, vegetable inks, are still actually only around 51% sustainable. So the reality being is that traditionally printed prospectuses aren't really that sustainable at all. And the impact, of course, that we can have as a sector, I think, is massive. So the CAO, which in a very reductionist way is kind of like the Irish equivalent of UCAS, and the CAO, they switched their handbook to a digital alternative. So now, as an Irish student, you're able to log onto the handbook and you're able to get a personalised shortlist of courses from all of the universities in Ireland. Absolutely fantastic. Their printed handbook was about 104 pages long, typically. At their smallest ever print run, it was 10,000. That is over 1 million printed pages. Now, I did the albeit hypothetical maths on this and stacked those pieces of paper on top of one another, and it comes out at 832 meters tall. That is 2 meters clear of the Burj Khalifa, the world's tallest building. Now, that is just one organization's impact on the planet. Imagine if we could all have these skyscrapers of paper that we save. And this all leads to the fact that the world is changing around us. The notion of kind of books has been in flux for years. We only have to look at Amazon Kindles and things like that. Catalogs have been changing too. And I always think of this example whenever I think about this kind of notion of change. This is two young lads here who have been tasked with dialing a mobile phone number on a rotary telephone. Now, to bring this back to the prospectus, the way in which users consume content has evolved at a similar rate of this. The current cohort of prospective students have grown up in a digital world. Their every move is online, more often than not using devices that they carry in their pocket. Entertainment, shopping, news, taxis, dating, everything is available at their fingertips. And yet the prospectus seems to have escaped this evolution somehow. Unfortunately, we probably don't have time for this video. I think it takes about 4.5 minutes for them to get even close to being able to dial the number in the end. But yeah, I'll put these slides up so you can watch the whole thing. And it's not just kind of young people either. If we look at businesses that have been built on catalogs, most notably IKEA, right? So IKEA is my favorite example because it was printing catalogues for 70 years. And throughout that 70-year period, at one point, it was printing more copies of its catalogue than the Bible, which is absolutely phenomenal, right? But their MD has said, yeah, media consumption and customer behaviors, they've changed. And IKEA is kind of making those digital investments to be where our audience is. Now, IKEA is, for me, I see it as a brand for everybody, regardless of age. And there are so many others. Argos, Mercedes, Ford, all these big companies are making this shift away from traditional formats into digital formats. So let's talk about how universities are adapting to this world of change that we see. Well, for those of you that do follow me on LinkedIn, you'll have seen a couple of months back that I requested 37 prospectuses from universities, their undergrad prospectuses. I did it again. This time I've done it for postgraduate prospectuses. RIP my inbox, it was obliterated, but it was really valuable. And there's some really interesting information to share off the back of this. So I'm going to enlarge this slightly for myself. Some notable things here. Having done this so recently for the undergraduate prospectus flow, in the postgraduate flow, generally just felt a little less slick, a little less considered than UG. What was quite surprising to me is that some universities, they didn't necessarily give me the right choices. So if in a large, I had to choose between either a printed copy or a digital copy. Some actually gave me the capacity to order both, which was great, but some really kind of pigeonholed me and said, well, you either are print or you are digital. And if I wanted both, I'd have to go through the flow twice. Crazy. One university, I got absolutely nothing from. It was a process that kind of led me into a dead end. So that was good that it was the minority, I guess. But it often felt like I was being added to a mailing list. It didn't feel particularly like it was for me. It felt like I was giving my data to the institution and they were definitely getting greater benefit out of it. And actually, when it comes to digital experiences, universities were quite vague as to what that meant. You know, was it going to be a truly digital experience? Was it going to be a PDF? Was it going to be an ebook? It wasn't really that clear. But what I did is I kind of categorized it into these elements of, you know, PDF only, choose one only, a digital experience, or both. Now, let's talk about PDFs because they were the winner by a country mile. And actually, this is a marked difference from undergraduate. So there's far more PDF prospectuses at PG than there are at UG, 89% more. And actually, that stat would be even higher if we took into account that this kind of element of both, where there's probably another 8 prospectuses there that were available as PDFs. There was kind of a mix of people asking for data. Some people did ask for data up front. Some people asked for a lot of data up front. Some asked for not too much. Some didn't ask for any at all, which was really quite interesting. 5 of the PDFs were, I'll talk about my hatred is a strong word, but it's the only one I can think of. My hatred of flippy PDFs, but 5 presented flippy PDFs. And more than one university, I was really surprised to see that they actually sent me off their website to issue.com to view it. And every PDF that I put through an accessibility scanner had accessibility problems. Now, for any of you that know the accessibility regulations, that's obviously putting a bit of a target on your back there, something to think about, I think. Let's talk about those digital experiences, a growing proportion, I think. Sadly, another one of those failed to load, leaving me with nothing to view. Weirdly, one of them, I requested a digital prospectus, and rather than saying, great, thanks for your data, off you go to that digital prospectus, they said, oh, we'll send you a link in your email. So I had to wait for the email to come through before I could get into the prospectus, which just felt like a kind of weird thing. I think it added to this whole thing of me feeling like I was a number in the workflow more than anything else. And 2 sent me to just existing areas on their website after taking my details, which felt like a violation. You know, it felt like I'd been tricked into handing over my data, really. Print, let's talk about print. One institution told me that I should expect up to 10 days from the date that my request was processed. Fine. But of those 8 prospectuses that I ordered, and I did this about 4 weeks ago now, I have received 0, not 1 printed prospectus. Which is shocking, really, because in the UG one, I was getting prospectuses within a couple of days. So let's look at what people are doing in this market. So we have people like the University of Glasgow who have created this prospectuses area on their website. For postgraduate, what that actually means is it sends you through to a list of their programs. So for me, there's something that feels it kind of isn't really a prospectus. It feels like it's a new way in. But I think that this comes from the fact that a lot of universities a big question that comes up is, isn't our website our prospectus? And I think there's it's a really good question and one that clearly University of Glasgow has sided on. Yes, it is. Let's talk about forms really quick. I mentioned these forms that we had up there. Now, what Gecko, by the way, Gecko form, killing it in this market. I think almost every university that I ordered a prospectus from was a Gecko form. However, some universities, they hadn't quite personalized just the little details, like the placeholders, for example. On more than one form, I saw this your.name@company.com. And again, it just felt like I hadn't really been considered as a prospective postgraduate student. And if we look in the UG market, for example, we can see that they're doing quite fancy things with forms. This one here, it's kind of like a very unusually laid out form, quite nice and easy to use, steps me through it really easily, feels really personalized, feels like I'm getting something off the back of it. And I just didn't see this in the postgraduate kind of flows that I was going through. Now, look, let's talk about these flippy PDFs. PDFs are problematic in their own right. I'll talk about that in a moment. These flippy PDF things are kind of like actually worse than just a normal PDF. The experience, as you can see here on a mobile, is just awful. Kind of just changing orientation is painful. Trying to actually find and read contents is really difficult. Page numbers no longer make sense and things like that. You don't stand to gain anything from doing it this way necessarily. And PDFs themselves, so we have University of Exeter here. They've got a very beautifully designed PDF prospectus, but again, it suffers from some of these problems. It's so clearly meant to be a printed piece of work that's being translated onto your computer. And again, if you're viewing this on your mobile phone, just things like the orientation make it really difficult. Page numbers are all out. The contents doesn't make any sense. And I think it's absolutely fine. If you're going to use a PDF, it shouldn't be just kind of a print version translated. Treat it as a digitally native thing, especially if you're not actually printing it. But what I will say is at the same time, Exeter University has some really interesting stuff going on. I found this on their LinkedIn. Here's a tin of beans that they've printed information onto. Now, this isn't their prospectus, but it is showing that they're thinking about different and alternative formats of passing over information. So yeah, I think there's some really cool stuff going on in that area. Unless you've been living under a rock, you'll have probably seen the University of Nottingham's micro prospectus. This is a really neat piece of signposting because they have a QR code that ultimately sends you to a data capture form, and from the data capture form it sends you to, again, a little bit like Glasgow, a list of their courses. But it's a really neat piece of signposting, because what they're able to do off the back of this is not necessarily have two different versions of this between UG and PG. We're all asked to do more with less. And this is a great example of how you can do that, cut costs in the process. And what I felt was really cool about what the University of Nottingham did, alongside this micro prospectus, they created this lookbook. This Mark was calling it premium kind of tactile experience. And I don't know how many of these they printed, not too many. I don't think this is something they keep on campus. They can take to fairs and show people. They can't take it away with them, but it still has that kind of luxurious finish. To me, this feels like the swan song of the traditionally printed prospectus. It's like, okay, if we're gonna go to digital, we're gonna go out with a bang. And they really did it here with this beautiful piece of work. The University of Derby is another university that's been doing some interesting stuff, particularly around personalisation. And again, this is a kind of very similar to their UG flow, I will say. What they've done is they've created a dedicated page on their website that talks to you about the postgrad experience, and it personalizes it by putting in links to, again, signposting to their course pages directly for you. So you can build up your own kind of directory of courses that you're interested in. It's a shame that some of the other information around that isn't so personalized. But that is exactly what somebody like the University of Essex has done. And so the University of Essex has got a truly digital approach. Again, it has both their undergrad and their postgrad prospectus within there. It asks you some questions about what it is that you want to study. And then what happens is you get this personalized overview. And what's really cool about it is, yes, you see the courses that you've chosen, but you also see all of this other information that's been personalized. So for example, they have multiple campuses, but it only shows you the campuses that are relevant to the courses that you've chosen to study, for example. So some really neat stuff going on with truly digitally authentic experiences within the sector. So the question, I guess, that we're trying to crack is, what is the future of the prospectus? And for me, I think in terms of what prospects are looking for, we have to think about what makes a compelling experience. Audiences are very clear. They want sustainable, personalized, instantaneous experiences from the brands that they interact with. And some of these traditional, I think why we've seen the shift away from the traditionally printed prospectus in postgraduate, I should also note here that not one of my 37 universities offered only a printed option. I thought that was particularly interesting. But the reason that I think we're seeing this shift to digital formats like PDFs is because they can be so much more instant, because, you know, we've seen from people like Derby and Essex that they can be personalized, and it's a big deal. And of course that it hits sustainability agendas too. But for me, what makes a compelling prospectus experience is not just how good it is for prospects, but also how good it is for people like yourselves, the people that are doing this, that are creating them. And I've talked before about the notion that we're all being asked to do more with less. I think that this might be another reason that we've seen a shift away from print. Personally, it's a big undertaking. I think for institutions, it's really important, particularly at postgrad level, that it's trackable. There's a lot of detail in there and lots of niche stuff going on. I think to be able to have those personalized conversations, we need to do a better job of tracking, but also to be more cost effective. Budgets, yep, it's a tough time for budgets. And so being able to do more with less on a financial basis, also a big tick in the box. But let's talk about, you know, why should we make that change? And for me, it's two clear reasons. One, we can save the world. Two, or at least we can make a dent in trying to save the world. Two, we need to meet student expectations better than we currently are. The University of Gloucestershire arguably the first to go digital only with their prospectuses. So really cool stuff that they've done in this space. And here there was an incredible post by Hesham from Gloss here. According to our statistics, by not publishing an undergraduate prospectus, we've avoided using 23.2 million litres of water, 11.6 million pages from landfills, and more than 1,160 trees since 2020. An incredible impact on the world around us. And I often talk at UG, I use this quote from students. I talk about like the physical ones being better, it takes a while and blah, but actually for postgrad, I see this in a slightly different light. So here, this person says, much better as physical ones are heavy, it takes a while to find specific courses, and not every piece of information is written on it or is too small to read. Now, at postgraduate, the devil is in the detail. Postgrad students, they want to know details about kind of some of the weird and wonderful things that go on. And actually, in slimming down the detail from prospectuses, you're doing a disservice to the audience, I think. Let's move on and talk a little bit about personalization. We see it everywhere. We talk about these digital experiences that are part of our lives now. Netflix, as a for example, Netflix will change the thumbnails for your TV shows based on who it thinks you are, because it thinks that in doing so, you are more likely to click the thumbnail and watch the TV show. A little bit dystopian? Yes. Does it work? Also, yes. Even in football, a topic that I know very little about, but in football, the advertising screens at the back, depending on the country or the TV channel that you are watching, those adverts will change. This level of personalization, it's all around us. And often we don't even realize that it exists. Now, for me, personalization is a baseline expectation in digital formats these days. There are so many reports showing that personalized experiences can increase page views. Instapage has this great stat that 74% of customers feel frustrated when website content is not personalized. Salesforce have been massive in the personalization game for HE at the moment. They're telling us that 83% of consumers are willing to share their data in order to create a personalized experience. So I come back to these kind of gigantiforms where you're filling in a lot of data. And if you don't get a personalized experience, it's very frustrating. There isn't that value exchange in place there. And of course, Segment here, they also tell us that personalized web experiences can increase conversion rates by up to 300%. So the value is on both sides of this scale here, for the prospects and for institutions too. And there are some incredible things going on in the personalization world at the moment. BeHuman.ai has this awesome piece of kit where you can film a video to camera and then it will generate an AI model of you, your face, your voice, and then you can simply change the script and the person will say something different, but their lips won't be dubbed like a bad foreign film. Instead, it will look like they are saying that. Now, for things like applications and the kind of conversion process, you can see how somebody speaking directly to camera to you, understanding you, it's a massive game changer. Now, this is actually happening in the commercial world already. A friend of mine, Bart, he's great.
We're here at your party.
He showed AmericanGreetings.com, where a little bit like those jab things, but now you can put in
with
your name.
Donny Osmond.
Donny Osmond here.
Happy birthday, Bart! This
like
one's
a song about Bart.
Bart, it's your birthday.
And you would think that he recorded it directly to you. It's impossible to tell whether it wasn't. There's some really interesting stuff going on outside of our sector that I think that we should be looking to bring into this sector. So I'm gonna wrap up here. Digital affords you many, many luxuries. And I think that digital first is an inevitability, but I don't think that that means that it should lead to subpar PDF experiences. I see the sector falling into a trap of convenience. PDFs are incredibly easy to migrate to, but they're a terrible experience for your users. It's clear that we've seen the shift away from print, but now I think that HE needs to learn from outside of the sector. We need to look at people like Mercedes, IKEA, Argos, and look at their digital transformations, because those that are making the switch to truly digital experiences are reaping the rewards. So thank you so much for your time today. I hope that you found that presentation useful. If you want the slides, they are available on this URL here. And thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Nathan. I will say straight away that I cannot stand ISU either. I apologize. I'm sure no one from ISU is on the call. That's highly unlikely. And I'm sure they're trying to do good people trying to do good work, but it feels like, you know, I don't know, putting the open day video on MySpace or something. It's a bit of a bleh when you see that stuff. But yeah, thanks very much. Great session. I think, you know, exactly as promised, really, understanding kind of where we've got to. I loved seeing the kind of Birmingham ones there. I was kind of imagining, I was like, I wonder what it'd be like if someone was just to do a really retro one, you know, and stick it at a UCAS fair, and whether or not, I wonder if that's, you know, it's not really the point. The point is to move away from print, but, you know, almost, yeah, a retro lookbook maybe. Well, that's probably what a lookbook does, doesn't it? Probably does look over the years and so on. But yeah, you know, really good to see the examples. And I think, you know, the system, you know, I'm really glad to see you focus on the sustainability thing too. As I was saying at the top, you know, a lot of these things, don't they? We know what happens to a lot of them, and actually to see the evidence. And I'm sure that's something that everyone can really get behind. Going, you know what, actually, this, you know, you talk about the ink and so on, as well as the paper, and the fact that this is just kind of a hiding to nothing. Eventually, we need to move away from this, and it's the sort of thing we should all collectively care about as a sector and celebrate. You know, we can have a big impact there. So we have actually had a question come in already, which is great. So I will jump on. It's something you did touch on, but I think you might want to talk a bit more about it. Please, if anyone else wants to pop any other questions in, I think we've got a little bit of time, you know, go for it. It's an interesting topic. And it can also be, you know, it's kind of the classic academic thing. It could be more of a comment than a question as well. It'll be interesting to hear your opinion on this, you know. Do you know, the things that you think we can and can't do with digital or print or vice versa. So anyway, Yasmin asked during the presentation, and she said you might cover this later, so apologies, but you did kind of touch on it, Nathan. But she's saying, do you have any problems with accessibility with a digital first approach? For example, I find it really hurts my eyes to read on a screen for a sustained period of time, so I'll always choose a physical book over an ebook. And I know you talked about how PDFs fail accessibility, but I guess other digital, the other challenges Yasmin's talking about, sorry, other digital formats would also have those to some extent, wouldn't they?
They do to some extent, but I think that they allow us to cope with it a lot better. So there's, you know, there are the accessibility laws that came into play 2018. I'm sure everybody's familiar with them, won't bore them about it. But with native experiences, I think it affords you the ability to you know, be able to zoom in. Like if the text is too small, you can make that bigger. It's really easy, and the text reflows beautifully. Allows people with disabilities, screen readers, to change things, color issues as well. They can recolor them, and I think it gives the university the flexibility to offer those sorts of options as well. You know, we've seen, thanks to the big tech companies, we've seen this proliferation of dark mode over the last couple of years. And I know that certainly makes it a lot easier for me to read in low light conditions. And so you've got all of these new tools that are available to you to explore. And I think with like retina displays and stuff like that, it's also interesting though to think about signposting as a thing that we don't need to have a huge page that we expect people to read in one go. Actually, you can break that down into chunks so that they can kind of piecemeal it and dive in, you know, in their coffee break, or when they're putting their kids together or something like to bed, something like that. I think we can think about content and how that links together, whereas in a traditional kind of indexed format, that's a little bit trickier to do.
Yeah, that makes sense actually. Hearing you explain, I suppose, with a book, yes, you can imagine kind of relaxing on the sofa with a cat. Other pets are available, but let's be honest, it's got to be a cat for this. And you're sitting there and you're reading through it, and that is nice, isn't it? But actually, a lot of that time is probably finding the information and then kind of chunking it out. Whereas done well, digital can be a lot, it can be a lot faster, can't it? And yeah, I think you're right, isn't it? I guess it's as accessible as a university chooses to make it, and they have tools at their disposal. Had a couple more questions come in as well, so we'll take a look at these. So an anonymous attendee says, with a very limited budget, do you have any recommendations for quick digital wins instead of using a PDF or issue?
I think there are a couple of different options out there. And what we're beginning to see is an increase in new companies in this market. Prospectus Plus, just one of them, for example, and I think that this is a problem that people are seeing. I see universities taking 6 months to put together these prospectuses, and there are techie people like myself going, that's crazy. We can totally change that. So there's companies like ours that exist, and I think that they're really good examples to turn things around quickly and on low budgets. There are other alternative options, and I think people are exploring those as we looked at in the presentation. There's things like creating web pages on your existing website. I would 100% always recommend creating a web page over a PDF page, for example. And then there's probably more kind of DIY things out there, like repurposing landing pages or blog formats or microsites maybe that you may be able to look at. But I think between your own website and this increase in vendors in the space, there's actually a growing level of choice for you.
Yeah, I should say as well, I mean, folks can consider me biased or otherwise, really, I can't control that. Nathan is here because we think he's an expert on this topic, not because, he has a product as such, but I have seen a lot of Nathan's work actually, and in my opinion, it's excellent. So I'm sure well worth having a chat. Very friendly guy, as you can tell too, as well. So someone that I'm sure can help you, and relatively impartial. Other pets are available. I'm sure other platforms are available, but this one is a good
yes,
one.
Yeah.
Cool. A few more questions then, if we've got time. So Ria Powell says, I know you mentioned the UCAS student lifestyle report. Could you let us know what other sources you've drawn upon to support the audience looking for digital only over print? Is there other data you can kind of point people towards there, Nathan?
Yeah, absolutely. So we look at a lot of the pulse reports. So I know, like FindAUniversity has pulse reports. We use Akiro's pulse reports quite a lot as well. We look at their data. Really interesting stuff that's going on there. The other thing that we do is we do a lot of our own research as well. So we worked with a college quite recently. They ran a focus group there, and they were speaking to all different types of audiences. So it's kind of a mix of what we're seeing out there in these papers and reports, but also our first party research in kind of going out and doing this ourselves. So yeah, a lot of the pulse reports that we're seeing from lots of vendors like FindAUniversity. I can probably, as part of the slides, draw together the sources that we're using for this stuff.
Yeah, I should say other pulses are also available. There are so many pulses, aren't there? But ours alliterates, as I always say. Ours is Postgraduate pulse, so it's the best.
Nice.
And we have done a little bit of research around it. I find whenever we tend to ask, how would you prefer to kind of get info from uni? We'll put print prospectuses, digital prospectus in there. There is always some, response level for print. I think that there's something of a bias there when you offer them the option. People will go for it, but it's always, I'd have to go back and check the data, but it tends to be dwarfed by website, so there is, I think, that initial interest in.
Yeah, and it kind of links to the other question that I can see in here from another anonymous attendee, and they say, if everyone else is digital, does print help one to stand out? I mean, yeah, possibly. I think this is about choice and doing what's right. I've laid out the case here that I think that things need to be personalized, instant, and all those sorts of things. And if print can help you achieve those goals, then I don't stop doing print. I should absolutely say I'm not here calling for the death of print. I actually think that, but I think that print is misused for the prospectus. And I think that if you move the print notion actually much further in the conversion funnel, right? So if you think about when you've got a warm lead and you're trying to convert them, send them a wonderful piece of print at that point. It's going to make them feel special and luxurious and all that sort of stuff. But don't do it at the beginning of the funnel, because it just doesn't seem, I mean, financially more than anything else, it doesn't seem to make sense there. But I mean, print is still big in the game, you know. And I mean, I studied as a print designer. I remember at university with my other co-founder, we were sat in the print room obsessing over paper stocks and print finishes and all that sort of stuff. So print definitely isn't dead. I just think it's misused.
Yeah, we've seen examples, well, haven't we? The from the micro prospectus to the lookbook, there are ways to innovate with it. But that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? What you say there, exactly. Feels like it's the sort of thing that would really be lovely for like an offer holder, wouldn't it? You could really give them that personalized, because then, don't you? Like, this is your course, this is this is the kind of stuff, this is what you're going to get, something, something quite neat there, and perhaps more value there. So that's good. And we've got a couple more questions, which I'll try and zip through, Nathan, as well. I'm sure you can see these as well. I'll go down the list. So we often, this is something which we try and showcase, best practice, change making, and so on. And another anonymous attendee is quite right to make this point, actually. We got these good reasons to move to digital, and that their team has discussed it at length, but it's stakeholders, isn't it? It's convincing others, requires that kind of mind shift, because they're going to say there's an objection, isn't there? What do we hand out at the open day? Any tips, Nathan, in your experience, how to kind of try and convince them?
I love this question. I think this is my favorite question, because what you can hand out is so much more infinitely awesome than a dead tree, right? So particularly at like fairs and things like that, I see these towers and towers of dead tree, and it's just so depressing, like you said. But actually, when it comes to, you don't have that anymore, and you can do this neat bit of signposting, I think you can play on your university's character far more. Known for sports, awesome. Give them a reusable water bottle with the prospectus URL printed on the side. Known for arts, awesome. Give them a tube of paint. Tell them to go and make their mark on the world. You can give them something infinitely more memorable than that kind of collection of pieces of paper. And I think we all talk about kind of getting this stuff and then just chucking it in the corner of a room and never looking at it again. What if you gave them something more? Oh, you were the university that gave me a tub of paint. It's that sort of conversation that you can start to have with people. We've seen universities already do this, where they're switching to kind of like University of Gloucestershire did this cool thing with a wristband. So people came up, they gave them a wristband. The wristband was made out of seeded paper, so they could go home and they could plant that, and it would grow. A great nod to their sustainability nod. We've completely leveraged that. We give people out these plantable pencils, so you can kind of write with a pencil until it's grown to a little stub, and then you can jab it into some soil, and bam, flowers grow. And again, these are just so much more memorable moments for a university than here's our booklet.
You know what? I remember one of the first things, I joined FAU about 10 years ago, and actually Sarah Linnington, our director of marketing, who joined a little bit before me, and one of the first campaigns, I think I'm right, I hope I'm not getting this wrong, that she put together, actually, it was called Time to Grow, because it's about growing, and it was, as you can tell, it was really neat. It's one of the things that made me think, this place is cool, this place is guided. So yeah, definitely so much cool stuff you can do that, and you're going to get coverage, aren't you? I mean, the type of power, I love that. Like, why not do that, and why not get people to send in like what they make with it? People will, like, we would love to kind of showcase that kind of stuff, and so probably other media as well would do that, so that's brilliant. Right, let's try and zip through. We've got two more, so quite a quick one, I guess. Another anonymous attendee. Does the research cover international preferences as well as UK? It's kind of a big topic, isn't it? Because obviously more expensive to mail them out, and maybe it's more digital anyway, but do we know whether international students feel different? I guess we probably do if I dig around in data, but what do you think, Nathan?
I mean, there's a couple of questions here, and they talk about the switch to digital's already happened. We're already seeing the majority of these prospectuses at postgrad being delivered digitally, not printed. And I think that the international angle to this is massive. We did some work on this about a year back. I don't have it to hand, but we looked at the cost of sending these out internationally. It's massive. And I know that it still is, because in some of the forms that I filled out, they said that the ones that had printed ones, they said that they wouldn't send me one if I didn't live in the UK. And again, you know, gosh, how isolating, how to make an international prospect feel like a second-class citizen. You know, you're not good enough to have this printed prospectus. Now, you can either kind of go, yeah, okay, this is going to be flipping expensive to do this, or you can go, we don't need to do this anymore. We can go digital, and they can have it instantly. There's lots of stuff around international. You know, I cover a lot of like research around these topics on my LinkedIn and post about those. So there's definitely things that you could, you know, I'll pull some of those together and post like a roundup of that perhaps. But yeah, the international angle to this is pretty massive, and definitely a very, very, very compelling reason to go digital.
I mean, one wants to be professional about this, but one might comment on the changing nature of international sometimes, and the need to make sure information is very accurate, and how print is, even when we can deliver it, is probably limited for that as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if there's anything you want to, I mean, Colette is asking, you know, a question comes saying that actually you talked about the CAO in Ireland, and she's got some kind of perspective on that, but a lot of the teachers who were using it were not super keen. I don't know if this kind of relates to the previous point, Nathan, if you've got anything else to add really, in terms of how you can kind of, you said, you know, the digital shift has already happened, whether there's anything particular you can kind of, you know, suggest there.
It's stakeholder management, isn't it? And education, I think. I don't necessarily suggest anybody rip up their traditional playbook and just implement a new one and kind of move forward with that. I think these things take time to transition to. You know, there are a couple of universities that are presented here, and I know that it took them 2 to 3 years to make the shift to purely digital, for example, and they had to do a lot of communication around that. These things will take time, and yeah, you are going to get kickback from some areas, I think, because they've done things for a certain way for a long time, and they're perhaps hesitant to change. But again, with digital, it's a world of opportunity, and actually there's more scope for feedback, implementing new ideas that can truly provide utility to these areas. And whilst at the moment it feels like we're very, very focused on the student recruitment angle of this, it perhaps also pays dividends to think about the other secondary audiences that are involved with a prospectus, and understand that you are meeting their needs as well as the needs of your prospects. It's a big thing. It's a big challenge for universities, you know, balancing so many different stakeholders and audiences. It really is. And but that's what makes it fun, right?
That's it. Yes, it's an adventure. Well, Nathan, genuinely, thank you. That was a great session. Really enjoyed going through it. Really nice interactive slides as well. You know, lots going on there. And I think, you know, great to see the questions. Thanks everybody, and you know, great answers too. I am just going to very quickly share my screen again. Hopefully this is going to work. Is it going to work? Who knows? Let's see. Is that working? Yes, perfect. Okay. I just want to really quickly say something about the next webinar. So I am hijacking the next webinar myself. It's going to be on the 25th of July, and I would love it if you guys came, or I'll talk about the topic really briefly in a second. If it's something that you're interested in, please come along. And if it's something you think colleagues would be interested in, please send them in your stead or bring them to. I want to talk about funding. I want to talk that I'm fine-tuning the actual title, but basically I want to try and answer the question, how much does a master's scholarship actually need to be, or at least how much is it? This is something that I think we're really lacking across the sector, is kind of visibility on that. You know, we know what we do at our unis. We probably see what other universities do, and we might get jealous of that or a bit confused as to, you know, the different practices. We are getting somewhere with the data we have on Find a Masters. We're getting somewhere towards getting a bit of useful insight in this, and I want to share it with you. I've shared a little bit of this before, but this is fresh. I'm going to look at, you know, how values differ across audiences, across subject areas, across mission groups, and actually what the trend looks like over time. This is vitally important because we need to understand kind of what funding levels are required, what students actually need. You know, we know that funding, you know, the kind of government funding, particularly in the UK, is fairly inadequate. We know that international students need support, and I think we just need better visibility on this. So I want to show you what I've got, and then I want to kind of implore all of you to kind of help us improve this data, and hopefully it'll be a kind of a virtuous circle. So it's something I care deeply about, and I'll be very, 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 very interested in hearing what you think of it. So 25th of July, 2023, there'll be more info coming out for that soon. Last little plug as well. I don't know if any of you are subscribed to our kind of Postgraduate Pulse, I've done that before, newsletter we put out each month. That's coming out next week. I'll be talking about some latest insight on international students after the changes that have been made, and various other bits and bobs. So if you're not subscribed, you can subscribe and grab that. It does involve a PDF, so I might have to think about that at some point, but it's a very short PDF. So there we go. And it will never be on issue. But anyway, I will call it there. Thank you so much, Nathan. Great session. And thanks to everyone for your time. See you all in July, hopefully. Okay. Cheers, folks. This is where I stop sharing and then I click end.